Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first History Student Reacts live stream. Thank you for those that are here. Hello, Cody. I can see you here in the chat. I appreciate everybody who's tuning in. Presumably, we'll get some more concurrent viewers as the stream continues. But for those of you that are here, basically, it's just a little live stream. We've recently reached 1,000 subscribers, which was, pretty cool. About a month ago at this point, early October. And so, I decided to do this live stream. We're going to do some reactions. I thought we would react to the Extra History Catherine the Great series, though we can certainly do other reactions if you guys have some suggestions. And Q&A if you guys have any questions, blah, 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 all of that good stuff. Hello, Timur Lane. Good to see you guys here. All right. Just, making sure everything is in order. This is, of course, my first time streaming, so I'm hoping everything goes well. My setup is quite old. My computer is very old at this point. It's got a couple years on it, so I'm hoping that it's able to adequately perform. But you guys can tell me how many frames we're skipping, if we are skipping frames. Am I studying currently? Well, I'm currently live streaming, but if you mean that in a general sense, I graduated from my undergraduate degree earlier this year, and I'm in the process of applying to a graduate program, PhD. So, alright, yeah, I'm seeing a couple frames dropping. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about that, so I'm going to continue as I am, and hope that it either gets better or doesn't get any worse. Yeah, hopefully at some point in the near future I can, get a better laptop or something, but, those can be pretty damn expensive. So for now, I just gotta deal with what I've got. Thank you, Richard. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in getting into Asian history. I mean, I'm interested in history around the world. Asian history is not necessarily one of my focuses. It's definitely not one of my areas of expertise. But if y'all have any suggestions or recommendations on reactions to Asian history, I'd absolutely be willing to do some of that. I really, I have my particular interests. I'm primarily into 18th century European and American history. I study the Enlightenment, but I really do have a global interest in history and historical content. So, if you guys have any suggestions, I'd be totally willing to get into other types of history. We started the early Muslim expansion series a couple months ago, and I didn't really know anything about the history of the Caliphate before that, but I'm always excited to learn. I haven't done any Kraut reactions. I've seen his channel around. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've even watched any of his videos. So no, I haven't done any Kraut reactions, but I can definitely take a look at his channel and add that to the list. Interesting. Yeah, he's got seemingly a fairly diverse selection of content. Some pretty interesting stuff. Turkish century. Okay, that's interesting. Um, no, Cody, but I have listened to the History of Rome podcast. I'm a big fan of that. Big fan of Mike Duncan. But no, I haven't listened to History of Byzantium. Um, would you recommend it? Uh, I mean, you're saying my judgments are somewhat similar to the showrunners, so that does sound interesting. And I always like to learn more about Byzantine history because my knowledge is, fairly sparse. Okay, wow, better than Mike Duncan. That's a pretty tall order. That's a tall order. I'll definitely check it out then. I need to note that down. History of Byzantium. Yeah, I love Mike Duncan stuff. I mean, I've been into history for a long time, and for many different reasons. I had a great high school history teacher, but Mike Duncan, I think, really in particular, got me into revolutions. Um, Listening to his podcast, I mean, that really sparked my interest in the topic. I think Mike Duncan is one of the best, like, I guess, creators in the general history sphere. He's a podcaster, but yeah, his stuff is great. Um, no, I'm not into Warhammer 40k. I'm not actually that familiar with it. I know that it's got a lot of pretty um, intense fans. A lot of y'all are really into Warhammer, but I've never really taken a look at it, to be honest. I'm kind of curious of the people here chatting. At what point were you guys introduced to the channel? What videos brought you in? Where did you first see me, or where did you first subscribe? Yeah, yeah, I hear you, Cody. I mean, look, I love Mike Duncan, and I think his podcasts are amazing. But I, you know, he can only do the same thing for so long, I guess. And I understand that he wanted to move on. But yeah, I would absolutely love to see more Mike Duncan on a variety of different revolutions. I mean, Cuban Revolution, that would be great. Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but I'm excited to see whatever Mike does in the future. Presumably he'll keep up the quality content. I don't know if he's going to do another podcast. I would love that. That would be pretty great in my opinion. Ah, Latex Heaven. Yeah, you've been here for a long time, and a pretty consistent commenter as well. Yeah, I think you appeared around the Napoleon videos because I just remembered, every time I'd upload one, you would always have at least one comment under it, with a lot of pretty useful information. Yeah, Timurlane Muslim conquest. Yeah, a lot of people joined around the early Muslim expansion videos. They were pretty popular, and I mean, what really makes the difference is if they bring in new people. If they get a lot of views, that's great. But if they bring in new people, then you're getting a whole different audience. And Cody around the Belisarius series, man, that was a fun one. That was a good one. I always really enjoy Epic History TV stuff. I mean, they're definitely like the highest quality history channel on YouTube, I think. I mean, they produce the most consistent, highest quality content. Yeah. Yeah, their Napoleonic videos are just fantastic. David the Builder video. Yeah, Roman, if you can find me a David the Builder video, I would perhaps consider reacting to it. Yeah, I'm very excited for the Italian campaign. I mean, I don't look. You don't want any channel to be locked into one thing continuously. I respect that they like doing a variety of content, but Epic History TV's Napoleonic videos were just so good. I mean, they were fantastic. So I'm really, really excited for more Epic History TV Napoleon stuff. Particularly the Italian campaign, because I feel like that's a really underrated aspect of sort of Napoleon's journey. I mean, I certainly do not know too much about it, except for the fact that as I learned during the Napoleon's Marshals series, that a lot of Napoleon's marshals and a lot of the guys that stuck with him sort of emerged during that Italian campaign. So I think that'd be a really great series. Yeah, maybe Extra History could draw more viewers. I like Extra History. I mean, they're also easier reactions than a lot of content because their videos tend to be only 10 minutes long on average. So my reactions are around like 20 minutes instead of some of these other videos I do, which I really enjoy, but you know, I'm sitting down recording for like an hour straight. I mean, that's that video on the like basically the history of Rome by Overly Sarcastic Productions. Holy moly, you know, that was a long one. Yeah, I'm gonna react to Islamic Golden Age. That one's coming up. I've got a bunch of more Islamic history and early Caliphate history videos on the back burner for the next couple of weeks. I was going to release Muslim Schism tomorrow, but then Kings of Generals released a new early Muslim expansion, so that reaction's going out tomorrow. And then we've got a bunch of Muslim history. Over the next couple of weeks, I like to space them out. So, Islamic Golden Age, there's two of them. We've got Muslim Schism, Arabia Before Islam. So, yeah, I've got a bunch of that stuff on the list. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how. I mean, the length of the reactions are interesting because I mean, longer videos may appear daunting, but at the same time, YouTube loves that watch time. So if you can get really high watch time on your videos, YouTube will absolutely push that into the recommended. Yeah, do you have any recommendations, Timberlane, or does anybody have any recommendations on good series or good videos on East Asian history? Because I would definitely love to do more Chinese or Japanese history. That'd be really fascinating. And I see your comment on History March, Cody Green. Um, yeah, I've seen History March before. I've watched I think some of their videos a while ago. You know, I used to be like I watched a ton of history content on YouTube back in high school, and then I sort of I've always watched it, but I fell off a little bit, and then I recently got back into it over the past like year and a half or whatever. So I think I watched History March like back in the day, and I think their videos have always been good. Thank you. Okay. Great, we're getting a lot of good recommendations here. I always like that because I want to, I want to do things that the viewers want to see, of course. Animated history of Japan, cool history bros. Yeah, there's a balancing act. I got to balance things that I'm interested in, things that the viewers want to see, and then things that I think will actually get views. Because, sometimes you get requests for something, and you do a reaction, and, YouTube is not interested on pushing it. Yeah, the Bulgars are really interesting. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that, Roman, but it might get a little too overlappy if I'm doing reactions to my own history content. I'm not sure if I have too much to add to my own videos. Anyway, on Cody, on your comment on Byzantine Bulgar Wars, yeah, that sounds really interesting. I think the Bulgars are super fascinating because, if I'm correct, they were like nomads, like Asiatic nomads or Turkic, or I don't know, that moved in from the east into the Balkans, where a lot of Slavs were, and then they basically ended up settling and integrating with local culture. And then, they formed this very powerful empire. I mean, Bulgaria, for a long time, was one of the really powerful empires of the Balkans. And I think at times they were really in direct contention with the Byzantines as the Byzantines continued to decline. Yeah, the Russo-Japanese War is an interesting one. It is definitely one of those things that happened in the run-up to World War One, a bit of a test run. It's also, it's got a lot of significance. I mean, one, the Russo-Japanese War obviously caused the Russian Revolution of 1905, which was important for Russia, but of course they did move past it. But I feel like the Japanese participation is the really interesting part. The ability of this Asian nation to defeat a very large European power, which, a lot of the Europeans didn't think was going to happen because of the racism of the era. They thought, that's not going to happen. And then, Japan actually did it. It's interesting. At the time, we're talking late 1800s into early 1900s. Japan's developing as this big, powerful empire, really. It's a growing empire. It defeats Russia. In that era, a lot of people in Asia, East Asia in particular, South Asia, were actually looking up to the Japanese. Even at some points, the Chinese thought, we should emulate what the Japanese did. And a lot of colonized peoples throughout Asia looked at Japan and said, wow, they are going toe-to-toe with these European powers. Now, of course, what happened in the long run is Japan would form their own Asian colonial empire and badly abuse and commit atrocities on the people that they ruled, and then the rest of Asia became a lot less fond of Japan. But sort of an interesting element of that era of history. Yeah. Yeah, I think the Bulgars are a complicated group. But that's kind of the Balkans in general. The Balkans is an incredibly diverse region with a lot of mixing, and, it got very bloody, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I've done a lot of Russian history. I mean, like I said, my main period of study is like the 18th century. 18th century Western European and American history. But I also find Eastern European and Russian history super interesting. I studied some of that at college, and I do sometimes I wish there was more Soviet history. I feel like that's kind of underdone because it's so recent. And also, like, super controversial, I guess. But I don't think it has to be. I mean, we're just looking at the objective as can get history of the situation, and I think it's really fascinating. Um, but yeah, some people really aren't a fan of that. Yes, I am interested in basketball. Um, yeah, I'm a big Sixers fan, so it's kind of a sad season so far. Um, all right, thank you, Cody. I appreciate you being here. You should definitely definitely get your work done. Um, but yeah, thanks for tuning in and thanks for viewing the videos. You are a frequent commenter. Franco-Prussian War by real-time history. Oh man, that's a good one. Well, I don't know if it's a good one, but the Franco-Prussian War is a good one. Hey, we got another Sixers fan. Roman will be happy to hear that. Um, but yeah, the Franco-Prussian War. That's another fascinating one. We're talking about the building of modern Germany. Um, yeah, okay. I don't think the Sixers are sad right now, but it's been a little sad to watch. I don't know. I mean, we're a good team. We're a great team. We really are. But I feel like we're always blocked from getting the next step. And we have like Harden being injured, and Harden was actually looking pretty good at the beginning of this season. But I mean, you're right. I'm being a little too pessimistic. I think that the Sixers have still. We've got the whole season left, right? Um, yeah. First Horse Warriors, Bronze Age Warriors. Yeah, that is completely out of my area of knowledge, but I'll definitely take a look. I did that one. Yeah, Harden really has been really solid so far. I mean, I think a lot of us were disappointed by his performance last season, particularly in the playoffs, but this season he definitely picked up the slack a bit. But yeah, the Bronze Age, that is definitely, outside of my realm of knowledge. Like I said, I did that one Historis Civilis Bronze Age collapse video. Um, but yeah. Yeah, Light X Heaven. I reacted to the Bronze Age collapse. I think it was actually the first video I uploaded on this channel. So it might not be the best quality content. It was the first one I did, but yes, I did do that a long time ago. Well, like a year ago, I guess. Yeah, Hard was beaten at BC last season. Oh man. What historical analogy would you make to the Sixers in recent seasons? Man, I don't even know. What is a historical analogy for like a state or a group or something that's really talented and keeps getting ahead but is always knocked back? I honestly don't even know. And of course, we don't know what the end of the journey is going to be. I mean, ideally, we get some rings. That would end. That would be absolute success. But who knows if it's going to end up that way. Yeah, imagine basketball videos where you you talk about recent events or series in basketball and compare them to historical events. I mean, I'm absolutely not going to do that, and that would not get like a lot of views. But what a ridiculous idea! Hmm. Yeah, I was planning on doing some reactions this stream to the Extra History Catherine the Great series. So we might try and do that, though to be honest, we're dropping a lot of frames. So I don't know how well that's going to work. Yeah. Embiid's really been through it, man. Like, he's so talented. I mean, he's one of the best players in the league, and it's just been so unlucky with all the injuries, and our front office was not doing a good job, particularly a couple years back. So we just want to see Joel succeed. But he's stuck with us. He has stuck with us. Mm. Yeah, I've been wanting to do. Yeah, great comparison, Roman. Yeah, Light X Heaven. I've been wanting to do something on Aurelian. I've got a lot of stuff in the backlog, and I want to keep doing series that I'm already doing. So it might take a while to get to it, but I think Aurelian is super interesting because I've done a lot on the late Republic, the early Empire, mainly the late Republic, to be honest. But Aurelian is a super fascinating figure, and you're right. I mean, he really. It's frankly amazing that he managed to save the Empire. I don't think anyone would have seen that coming. So yeah, he is. I think also an underrated historical figure. Restorer of the World. Yeah, that's great. That's a great title. I think, and I talked about this in my Overly Sarcastic Productions Rome video. I mean, I think, I do find the popular eras of Roman history interesting. Like everybody else, everybody enjoys the late Republic and the early Empire, and I love that stuff as much as everybody else, Caesar, Augustus. But I do think sort of the mid to late Empire, when everything's sort of falling apart and the Empire is being split up and brought back together, is a really fascinating period. And it's a really fascinating look at sort of the resilience of Roman institutions, Roman culture, all of that kind of stuff. And then also, the question of when Rome actually collapsed, because, of course, the West collapsed and the East survived. We had the Byzantine Empire, which is the Eastern Roman Empire. And a lot of Roman... Yes, that is very true, Light X7. I also find that transition from Rome to feudalism in the Dark Ages really fascinating, as we see, the currency getting increasingly inflated and useless. People are trading more with things, local autonomy. All of these local leaders who will sort of become kings and lords down the line are gaining more power. The centralization of power is collapsing. I'm not a Roman or medieval historian. Definitely not a medieval historian, but I feel like that transition is really, really fascinating. Yeah, true. I think, you know, the Empire was going through crisis, so, we have a lot of emperors who are just trying to sort of reform and reforge the Empire, trying a lot of different things. And what I will say is that, I mean, once again, we talked about this in the OSP reaction. There is a desire to sort of keep the empire together, to reunify it. Justinian did this same thing later with the Byzantine Empire. He wanted to reunify the Roman Empire, but it really just wasn't going to happen, I think. The tides of history were against it. So I think those who attempted to split the empire or split leadership, whether, to what extent it was successful, there were at least those who had an eye for the future. There were those who knew what was coming. In terms of the Greco-Persian Wars, Alexander's campaigning, I honestly do not know really anything about Alexander. It's not my area of expertise. In terms of ancient history, I know a lot more about Rome. So I don't know about the ancient Greek armies of that era. Obviously, Alexander like conquered everything. So that's all I can say. No, I'm not really a military tech enthusiast. I mean, I'm not even a military historian. I'm far more focused, in my like research on intellectual and social history. But I have a general interest in military history as much as any other kind of history. But I'm not specifically an enthusiast of military or military tech. My knowledge is very lacking in that department, I would say. But if you're looking at YouTube, and what I'm doing is obviously involved with YouTube history content. I do reaction videos. Um, I mean, I have my own history channel where I don't do military history. I largely make videos on sort of intellectual and social history. But in terms of the reactions, like easily the most popular stuff on YouTube is the military history. I mean, yeah, people love it. Whether it's whatever group, whether it's the Caliphate and its conquests, Rome, whatever. People love that kind of stuff. All right. I, I say we. Well, that's true. That's very true. Um, I mean, look. To me, I love, um, like intellectual and social. I'm not as much into economic history, but it very much ties in with a lot of other things. So I love nothing more than talking about ideology and the development of different social movements and intellectual strands and different figures of the Enlightenment. But it is definitely a little more dense in terms of YouTube videos. It's definitely not necessarily as exciting for most people as big battles and wars and stuff like that. And I understand that. I mean, look, I would, I could talk about the divine right of kings for a long time. Um, I mean, I could easily talk about the development of the modern state and the centralization and development of bureaucracy and the Enlightenment and divine right of kings, blah blah blah. But I mean, you're right. It's not as generally appealing as the military topics. I mean, like I said, we can look at the most popular content, history content on YouTube, or like out in the real world or old media. The most popular history content is easily like World War II and stuff like that. Like that's what your dad's into. um, so yeah, that does make sense. And yeah, Timberlane. I mean, look, I would definitely be interested in learning about military tech. Um, like I said, it's something I know virtually nothing about, so I'm not sure. I'd have to consider before doing reactions on it because I'm not sure how much I could really add, but I'd definitely check it out. Yeah, yeah, that's very true, Roman. I wouldn't want to lose the mandate of heaven, the mandate of heaven that my channel has been blessed with. Self evidently. Yeah, Yeah, the Ukraine War series. Yeah, I've been thinking. Here's the thing, I haven't watched any of the Kings and Generals Ukrainian War series, but I've been seeing them since they came out, and you know, I don't know. I mean, initially, I wasn't reacting to them because I was just doing other stuff. And it's of course really fascinating that we're getting this as it comes in. Um, and when I thought like a couple months ago, I was like, oh, maybe I should react to the Ukraine Russia war videos. My first thought was, well, I'll wait till the war is over. It seems a little more respectful or whatever. But the war has dragged on, I think, longer than anyone could have expected. I mean, at least at the beginning of the war, it really didn't seem like it was going to drag on for this long. So now I'm thinking about jumping in and watching some of those Kings and Generals videos on the Russo-Ukraine war. Though it'll be really interesting to react to some content and to a historical event that I was around for, saying, yeah, I remember what I was doing on that day. I mean, I do. That day when Russia invaded Ukraine was crazy, man. I mean, obviously, we must have some... We got to maintain perspective, and that's what... One of the things I thought was really strange at the time was that, I'm a well-fed, well-off American, sitting like thousands of miles away, and I'm watching a war play out on like Twitter. I'm seeing videos of buildings being bombed and tanks and stuff on social media. It's a really strange disconnect. And then we get history videos about it. It's a really, really odd situation. Yeah. Yeah, that's a skill issue on the Russians' part. I mean, that is basically what they did. They tried to blitzkrieg in. They rolled all their armed convoys in, and they went to take over all of Ukraine's major cities. Of course, they're going for Kyiv. That was one of the main goals. But surprisingly, I think to a lot of people, including myself, Ukraine managed to hold them off, and then over time, over the months, push them back. And then, of course, after that happened, Putin claimed that, well, yeah, the original goal was just to seize eastern Ukraine. Now, obviously, we know that wasn't true. But now, it seems like the Ukrainian pushback has stalled a little, and we have this situation where, we have Russia holding a good chunk of eastern Ukraine, and of course they had those, like votes or whatever. They declared the provinces of eastern Ukraine part of Russia. But, so I don't know where it's going to go from here. I really don't. Yeah. Yeah, Timberlane, I think that's exactly right. I think they underestimated Ukrainian opposition. I think also they underestimated the global response. I mean, Russia managed to, they invaded Georgia in 2008. Roman knows about that. And they invaded Crimea and seized Crimea in 2014. And both Georgia and Ukraine in 2008, 2014 really struggled to defend themselves. And the global response, the Western response, was fairly flaccid, to be honest. But with this invasion of Ukraine in 2022, like, the response from the world was massive. I mean, countries like America and France and Germany and et cetera, sending tons and tons of weapons and money and supplies to Ukraine at a level that I really don't think Russia expected. And then all of these countries also, putting sanctions on Russia and, sanctioning their oil. That's the main thing. I think Russia probably thought that they could use their gas diplomacy to sort of push Europe around, which is what they've done before. But, most of Europe, made the decision to cut imports of Russian gas, and I mean now they're suffering the consequences. But yeah, I think Russia really underestimated the opposition. Yeah, I knew that's what you were thinking of, Roman. Mark Felton Productions. I've never heard of Mark Felton Productions at all. Yeah, yeah, Russia. I mean, I really like Russian history. I've done a lot of Russian history reactions. I don't know. I don't know who Mark Felton Productions is. Okay, he's on the list. He's on the list. Wow, yeah, this is a popular channel, huh? 1.7 million subscribers. I've honestly never heard of this channel. Okay, yeah. Seems like a great channel for World War II stuff. I'll definitely check that out. um, but yeah, on Russia, yeah, I find Russian interest history fascinating, really interesting. Um, primarily modern Russian history. So I like Peter Forward. And Russia, the collapse of the Soviet Union was such a consequential moment that altered like everything. And, Russia, the 90s were terrible for Russia, and their political system did not, it, you know, it did not evolve into a developed Western democracy for many reasons. And so, there's been a return to, maybe not even a return because they never really left, but I suppose a return to authoritarianism and aggressive foreign policy. Chechnya and Dagestan are some of the earlier examples of the post-Soviet aggression. Um, you know, and then of course Syria. Yeah, Syria is interesting. I think it's a little. I mean, it's still an attempt for Russia to, become more powerful and influential globally. But yeah, the Chechnya, Dagestan, Ukraine, Georgia, those ones are interesting because that really looks like a direct attempt of Putin to basically reconquer the Russian sphere of influence that was alive under the Russian Empire, the Tsars, and the Soviet Union. Yep, Soviet-Afghan War. Yeah, that's very true, Light Heaven. If you're going to talk about Russian geopolitics and, Russian politics in general, of course, there's a lot of contributing factors, but you absolutely have to talk about Russian history. I mean, it's just a lot of contributing factors to the modern day ideology of a lot of Russians, particularly nationalist Russians, and of course, Putin, who in this case is the one who really matters. He's the one at the top. He's the one in charge. There's definitely a big connection. And I mean, of course, if you look at Russian history, at what point has, like, I don't know. I have a lot to say about the collapse of the Soviet Union, frankly, because the idea is that, the Soviet Union collapses and then Russia embraces freedom and democracy. But, like, how is that going to happen? Like, Russia was not set up for democracy. It had like no experience with democracy. Like what experience with democracy does Russia have? There was that election under the Bolsheviks, which Lenin immediately crushed, and then there was the period during the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the Russian Federation, where there were elements of emerging democracy that faded away throughout the 90s. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, but not enough that I could compare it with the U.S. Occupation of Afghanistan, particularly considering that the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan ended not that long ago. So I'd need to get a general overview of both conflicts. So yeah, you might be right, Timberlane, but it is fair to say that invading Afghanistan was really bad for the Soviet Union and the United States. Uh, Regardless of the reasons for going in, it ended up being a massive resource sink for both empires, for the Soviet Empire and the American Empire. Yeah, Roman Mr. Beast reaction when. Yeah, I feel like that might be a slight departure from the tone that I've been developing on this channel. I've been doing history reactions, and yeah, I did that recent reaction to the Russia-Ukraine war, which I consider more current events geopolitics. Yeah, the Swedes are interesting. I think I know I've gotten suggestions for the Great Northern War before. I don't know if it was by you, Light Heaven, or someone else. Um, but yeah, the Swedes. I mean, I love a lot of history, as you can tell. The Swedes are fascinating because Sweden is not a great power and has not been a great power for a long time. But there was a period when they really were. I mean, we think of Gustavus Adolphus and the 30 Years' War. What a man. And the Great Northern War. But although that's kind of, in some ways, the like bringing Sweden's great power status to an end, or at least watching it decline. But of course, it also involves the ascent of Russia, so that's pretty interesting. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna ignore your facile Squid Game comment, Roman, and address your serious comment about the Soviet Union. It's very true. Like the Soviet Union, it was obviously incredibly influential, and the collapse of the Soviet Union was also incredibly important and influential for modern history. But they have, like you said, this distinct political identity, and so it really colors how they're addressed. Like, I feel it's kind of challenging to talk about the Soviet Union in just a a genuinely historical manner. Like, I'm not coming at this with an agenda. I just want to talk about Soviet history because, you know, I mean, you get some tankies who just want to defend the USSR, but I think the bigger issue is like Westerners or like Americans who have just this immediate distaste for, the Reds, the Red Soviet Union. I'm like, look, I just want to talk about the history, man. And like, it's important. You can't ignore it. Like, the Soviet Union was around for decades, and there's a lot that went on in those decades. It's more complex than a lot of people think. But yeah, the 30 Years' War was a mess. I read a bit about the 30 Years' War a couple years back. I haven't really returned since, though it's a really important war for sort of the development of modern Europe, but it is incredibly complex. I mean, sort of the base level framing, people often frame it as this Catholic versus Protestant conflict, but it's like not really true, because as you said, there's too many actors, motives, and switching sides. Like, a lot of these countries are fighting under the guise of religion, but it's totally disingenuous. It's actually power politics. And then, of course, we have, Catholic powers on the Protestant side and Protestant powers on the Catholic side. So the 30 Years' War is a really complicated topic. Exactly. Catholic France, like, it's obviously, sure, it's partially about religion, obviously. But that cannot be the only motivating factor, because it's pretty clear that France was trying to get at its Catholic allies. They wanted to get one over on the Habsburgs, I believe. And so, yeah, they sided with one of the main Protestant powers, Sweden. Yeah, that's not very Catholic of you. But it's fascinating also because, the 30 Years' War is this intense, extremely brutal, particularly if you're German, religious war that, as the name suggests, went on for 30 years, decades. But at the same time, it also marks the end of the 30 Years' War marks a sort of beginning. I don't want to say something inaccurate. Not the beginning. Basically, if we look at the late 1600s into the 1700s, religiosity and the importance of religion declines. You know what I mean? As we see the rise of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, a lot of that religious sentiment begins to decline. Now, it remains for longer than I think a lot of people think. But, in some ways, I kind of feel like the 30 Years' War is like a last expression of that, like, religious animosity or something. Maybe not. But it is kind of interesting. Yeah, Timberlane, I don't play much basketball. Or at least I haven't for years. So no, I don't really hoop. I'm a couch potato. I sit down, I watch the game. I'm like eating chips on stuff. So no, I don't play very much. Yeah. Yeah, that is correct, Roman. I mean, I don't need to explain to you, but yeah. Um Obviously religion was important in the Crusades, very obviously. But if we look at some of the squabbling and fighting amongst the Crusaders, or the Catholic or Western Christian Catholic disrespect slash in later Crusades violence against the Eastern Orthodox Byzantine Empire, it's pretty clear that there were a lot of political motivations. Sure, I'm sure some of these crusaders were motivated by pure faith, pure belief, but a lot of them wanted to go to the Holy Land and just claim new kingdoms for themselves. Yeah, I have seen some of the Great Wars videos years ago. Like I said, when I was watching a lot of history content back in high school, I watched a lot of their, maybe not a lot, because they released a ton of videos, but I watched a fair amount of their videos, and I remember them always being pretty enjoyable. So I think that'd be a good suggestion. And also, I think I agree. The interwar period is super, super underrated. Not to mention that World War One itself is, sort of understudied compared to World War Two. World War Two really takes all the attention away from World War One and the early years of the interwar period. Because the later years of the interwar period, we're getting into like the 1930s, particularly the late 30s, just get lumped in with World War Two. Like, here was the lead up. But it wasn't just the lead up to World War Two. It was an entire period, and it was also, the climb down from World War One. So yeah, that's an interesting period of time. Yeah. Yeah, the Romans are supposed to reclaim their territory. It didn't end up happening. And then eventually, of course, the Crusaders would really screw over Constantinople. Um, yeah. I've done that series on the first Crusade, or at least whatever was released of the first Crusade, and I understand why Alexios Komnenos sort of kicked everything into motion. Um, and the first Crusade was probably more beneficial than negative for the Byzantines. But as this trend, yeah, as this trend of crusading would continue, it would just get worse and worse for the Byzantines, like the sack of Constantinople. Yeah, it's a shame because there's a big debate over when the Roman Empire ended. And I think the question is kind of silly because Roman institutions, Roman culture, Roman law would survive for hundreds and hundreds of years up until modern Europe. But if you want to take the question more literally, I'm definitely a believer that the Byzantine Empire was the Roman Empire. It was the Eastern Roman Empire. And so the Byzantine Empire was absolutely a continuation of the Roman Empire. Now, of course, it was super different, and they were all Greeks and all that good stuff. But there was already change over time. So yeah, it's kind of sad. Finally, a sane person. Yeah. Unlike a certain other. Oh, Rome. Yeah, Rome is interesting, and like I think the OSP video, overly sarcastic productions that I reacted to, really put it pretty well. In that, of course, Rome was an empire, and that empire eventually fell, and it continued with the Eastern Roman Empire. But more than that, Rome is sort of remembered for the legacy that it left, both in the East and the West. I mean, Roman institutions would survive. A lot of Roman institutions, particularly, say, of Roman law and Roman culture, would survive in one way or another in the West, like literally up until present day Europe. So when you talk about the fall of the Roman Empire, first off, it didn't fall, Constantinople. Second off, it's just really fuzzy. Yeah. Yeah, Rome lasted an incredibly long amount of time. And it's definitely one of the more interesting empires in history, I think. Particularly as primarily a land empire. I don't know, the Chad Roman Empire versus the soy British Empire. No, I don't know. I like the Romans. They're pretty fascinating. Yeah, we could ask the Romans about inflation. I'm not sure if they would have a great response. Um, oh wow, thank you, Roman. This is your mod fee. I appreciate that. Maybe I will react to some Georgian history now. Romans bribed me. We'll get some Georgian history coming up. I definitely would react to Georgian history, Roman. I know it's kind of a meme, but if I could find some good content to react to, I would definitely like to learn a little bit more because it's at an interesting spot, and Georgia's been around for a long time. Yeah, yeah, my morals are up for bribes. But yeah, we could ask the Romans about inflation. I'm not sure if we'd like their response. I mean, I guess it depends how you look at it. They didn't really manage to solve that problem. But, I mean, if you look at it from a different perspective, they did manage to solve the problem. Yeah, well, they wouldn't tell us to reinstate slavery, but they'd say, well, why don't you try feudalism? I mean, that's what our empire devolved into. Why don't we do that? Inflation? Well, why don't you just start bartering for stuff again? Uh, Turn all your farmers into serfs. Yeah, dude, the Praetorian Guard. This is what seems to happen with these sort of groups. I think the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire are a great comparison, in that the Praetorian Guard is this elite guard for the emperor, and increasingly over time they just get more powerful. Just demand more money, and just start stabbing every emperor. Then we have the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire, which were, I mean, there's a lot to say about the Janissaries. They started off as, Christian boys taken basically as slaves from their families as children, who were then trained to be elite soldiers. But over time, the Janissaries evolved into this elite soldier corps that would basically just hang around Constantinople / Istanbul and pressure the Sultan into doing whatever they wanted. So this is what seems to happen with these elite soldier corps that hang around the capital. Thank you, James Jen, for 59. I very much appreciate that. And yeah, the Ottoman Empire is super underrated. I'm a big Ottoman fan. In college I did at college I started off doing a lot of Eastern European Soviet history. And I also did a lot of Balkan history before I switched to sort of more modern Western Enlightenment history. But yeah, I agree. I think the Ottomans are super interesting. The empire is super important. And I agree, really underrated by people in the West. Particularly because, they ruled over the Balkans for a long time. And the Balkans are like the intersection, at least in terms of Europe, between like East and West. The intersection of, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Islam. The intersection of the Ottomans and, the Western empires, the Habsburgs. The Balkans are super fascinating, and the Ottomans are an integral part of that history. Yes. Assassination of Julius Caesar is coming up at some point soon. The Historia Civilis reactions will continue until there's no more Historia Civilis to react to, which will be a sad day because I love his videos. But yeah, that's coming up soon. Knowledgia, Ottoman history. I'll take a look at that. Knowledgia, Ottoman history. Timurid Empire. Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look. Timurid Empire. Battle of Ankara, Osman versus Timur. Yeah, I mean, I just got recommended Century of the Turks by Kraut earlier. I don't know if that was also you, Timurlane, or someone else. I can't remember at this point. Oh yeah, that was you. That was you earlier. Yeah. I'll look into Century of the Turks by Kraut. The Turks are a very interesting group. I mean, the Turks are a very interesting group. But yeah, I'm an Ottoman fan in particular, and then we have the. I think about the Ottoman Empire was that from I don't know, I guess we could say the late early 1700s, there were a couple of important battles, and, the Ottoman Empire was basically in decline for hundreds of years. They very quickly rose to power, but they were in decline for as long as they were around, which is very interesting. I mean, it's similar for the Byzantines. The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, was also in decline for hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, longer than the Ottomans were in decline. But yeah, the Ottoman Empire is fascinating. I mean, I think these land empires are really interesting. Because, I mean, I was talking about how I'm more into intellectual and social history. Something I find really fascinating about these land empires is, the degree of toleration and assimilation and how they treat different ethnic groups, different religions, all that kind of stuff. Because if you're a rapidly expanding empire, you're going to have to learn how to deal with other groups of people. And it's probably better to have some level of toleration so you don't have to kick everybody out or kill everybody who, for example, with the Ottomans, isn't Muslim. And of course, the Ottomans ended up having a ton of Christians and Jews in their empire. And eventually, those Christians, Catholics, and Orthodox would get upsetty spaghetti, and the Ottoman Empire would break apart. But, you know. Yeah. This is a good point, Light X Heaven. Yeah, the Austrian Empire was very skilled at diplomacy, foreign diplomacy, but also, we talk about like Austria or the Austrian Empire to basically describe this grouping of a bunch of different kingdoms and principalities and polities that are just basically under the Habsburgs. And they're so incredibly disunited. I mean, eventually we see Austria-Hungary, where Hungary in particular is given, more autonomy. But, I've done a little bit of research on Maria Theresa and Joseph, and, Joseph was more a reformer than Maria Theresa was. But, she also implemented some pretty important reforms, but it was incredibly difficult to institute policy across the empire because they'd have to do it differently everywhere. They could only institute policy easily in like the Habsburg holdings, like personal holdings, primarily Austria. But if they wanted to implement something in Hungary, they'd have to deal with the feudal Hungarian lords, and they didn't want to have to do anything they didn't want to do. So yeah, it was incredibly complicated, as you said, a jigsaw puzzle consisting of polar opposite magnets. But yes, somehow they made it work over a long period of time before it all broke apart. Which, it's not really their fault in particular that it broke apart. I mean, all of the multi-ethnic empires and states would break apart as nationalism rose, and the modern nation state was brought in some places forced, but, in Europe mostly it was wanted by the different peoples. Yeah, a Franco-Austrian Union. Man, what would have happened to Prussia/Germany? Well, that would have been a different situation. Roman, giving an ultimatum by the Great Khan to let him seize control of the channel without resistance or have his army take matters into their own hands. Yeah, if I was getting an offer from the Great Khan, then I think I'd just have to give him the channel. We sort of know what happens when you put up resistance. It ends up a lot worse than if you just let it happen. Hello, Nalen Hazard. Coward. Yeah, okay, you could say coward, Roman, but, a lot of those people who resisted, they left nothing behind. So, better the other way, I think. And yeah, the exchanges between Octavian and Mark Antony. That's going to be interesting. I think Octavian's a really fascinating figure, and I know that. I mean, I watched Historia Civilis' newest video, and I know a lot of people don't really like Octavian, and I get it. He's not a big, strong, powerful general. That's Agrippa, and he's also pretty brutal at times. But I think I have more of a general view on Octavian as Augustus, because I know, yeah, exactly, Octavian with his masterful politics and propaganda, right? I know a bit more about him as Augustus, and you know, yeah, masterful politics and propaganda, and he also absolutely set the standard for all Roman emperors to come. I mean, Augustus is so important. It can't be underrated. Go ahead, Timberlane. What a question. What a question. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, but if I'm reacting to Ottoman history, I might fail. I hate to say it. If I've got, if I'm watching that Turkish century video, I might not last. No nationalism November. Yeah, that's a different kind of NNN. Yeah. Well, Timberlane, when you bring the Ottomans into it, I can't help myself. Yeah, Light X Heaven. That's very true. As the Senate increasingly became a pathetic institution that existed only to lick the boot of the emperor, sorry for the judgment, but that is what happened. Um, Augustus knew perfectly how to do whatever he wanted, as emperor, basically. As emperor, while also appeasing them, making them feel important, because that's what they wanted. Like these remaining senators, like I said, they most of them had no spine. What they wanted, these old patrician senators, was basically to maintain their position of privilege and feel important in some way. And Augustus knew this, so he let them remain privileged. He let them feel important, while basically stripping their power away from them. Yep. Man, dude, Light X Heaven, we've got the exact same talking points. I don't know where that comes from, but everything you're saying is exactly what I would say. But yeah, that's very true. Augustus was very unlucky with succession, but it was also his biggest failure, and would become the biggest failure of many a good emperor because Augustus set the precedent of not being able to have a really successful succession. And obviously, as you know, this was a big issue for the emperor all the way through the Byzantines. Yeah, probably your bachelor's in history. That makes sense. That makes sense. Do you watch anime? Well, if the finest Corey in the house fills the definition, then I don't know what to say. Perhaps I do. Light X Heaven, when you were doing your bachelor's in history, what was your like specific, or did you have a specific regional or time period focus? I'm curious because you seem to know a lot about modern European history and a lot about Roman history as well. Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. So is that what you do right now? Are you a teacher? And if so, like at what level of education? Ah, okay. Focus on high school level. Equivalent. Okay. So outside of America, if you don't mind me asking, and don't answer if you don't want to, like what country are you educating in, or what country are you in? I'm curious. If you could make an anime out of any historical topic, time period, person, what would the anime be? Oh man, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I could you could make an anime out of like a lot of different historical topics. Um, okay. The Kingdom of Bernadotte. You know, I think I knew that. You've left some comments suggesting that, I believe. Okay, interesting. That's why you like the 30 Years War, or you like Sweden as a great power, or as Tamerlane puts it, land of the meatball. Yeah, I think if you're going land of the meatball, you're gonna have a tug of war between Italy and Sweden. To be honest, we might start an international conflict. The quest for Prester John. Oh, you deleted your own comment. Um, yeah, yeah. Roman, we all saw you misspelled it. You should own up to your mistakes. Um, yeah, the quest for Prester John would be like a comedy anime, I think, because it's absolutely ridiculous thing. Okay, yeah, autocorrect. Sure, sure, sure. Um, I mean, I talked about a little bit the quest for Prester John in the like Patreon channel member exclusive Ethiopia series. Um, but that's just a ridiculous story. In the anime, they actually find it. Well, I mean, they did actually find Ethiopia, but it just wasn't. I mean, what they wanted was a Christian kingdom surrounded by Islam that was, fighting the good fight of Christianity. And that was the general idea. And then they had a bunch of specific things that ended up all being wrong. And they looked in a bunch of different places around the Indian Ocean. And they eventually found a Christian kingdom surrounded by Muslim powers. So, like, they kind of found what they wanted, but not really. And it also wasn't the kingdom of Prester John. Oh, interesting. Yeah, no. Prester John was not. But they kind of found what they were looking for. Yeah, that's an interesting thesis, Light X7. How historians have interpreted Gustavus Adolphus between 1800 and 2000. Yeah, I don't know that much about Gustavus Adolphus. I just know him as like the, you know, badass dude during the 30 Years War. Like, that's kind of how we talked about him. Like, yeah, he rode in and won a bunch of battles and all that kind of stuff. But outside that, I have like virtually no knowledge of the man. But that's definitely an interesting question. Oh, really? A Peter the Great anime? Like what? Okay, explain yourself, Roman. Why exactly do you want a Peter the Great anime? I mean, I agree he would be as good as a lot of other topics, but why Peter in particular? Hmm. Yeah, I mean, history is very interesting, and as is historiography, which is, I mean, unless you're actually a historian, like, you're probably not doing much about historiography. But I find that really interesting because I find, say, the development of nationalism in Europe to be particular, really interesting. And of course, that really alters people's views on history and nations and the nation state, etc., etc. Hello, Trevor. Anime OVA of the resurrection of Jesus. Yeah, that would be a great one. I mean, that'd be unbeatable. Yeah, Peter the Hermit anime. Yeah, you know, these would all be great comedy animes. Now, like Prester John, hilarious. Peter the Hermit. I know a lot of bad stuff happened with Peter. A lot of, there were a lot of innocent people murdered as a bunch of peasants trooped across Europe. But this would definitely be a comedy anime. Like, just what a ridiculous figure. Like, it's just so stupid. Well, that's what I'm thinking, Roman, about Peter the Great. All the different arcs, but like, what would you be your angle? You know what I mean? Like, because the other ones we mentioned are definitely comedy animes, but like, what is the Peter the Great anime? Does he have like a training arc? Is that his travel around Europe? Peter the Hermit, Diogenes, all of these very interesting figures throughout history. What would be a good anime? A good historical anime? I mean, it could be anything. Like, I'm surprised there. I guess there's not a lot of historical anime, but like, fucking Napoleon, obviously. Like, Napoleon would be a great series. A high school anime following Pythagoras. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, Rasputin. There's so many topics. There's really so many topics. Um, yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you could do like virtually anything, really. Tiny Media Napoleon. Man, you guys know all the history content. Tiny Media, I think that's another channel that I'm totally unfamiliar with. And I feel, generally pretty well versed in the history space on YouTube. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, this channel doesn't have that many subscribers, so that's why I'm not as familiar with them. All right, I'll take a look at that. Okay. Um. Yeah, that would be perfect, Roman. That would be perfect. Napoleon plays Napoleon Total War. Oh, Napoleon. It just didn't come together, man. It just didn't come together. I mean, particularly the 100 Days. Like, let's be honest, it was a pipe dream. Like, it wasn't gonna happen. He had this triumphant return. There's all the stories of him, going throughout France and armies surrendering and joining Napoleon. His old veterans are still loyal to him, and that's great. And that's great stories, great propaganda. But with the amount of resources and men that the coalition had marshaled to defeat Napoleon in the first place and get him to abdicate, it just wasn't going to happen with him coming back. I mean, I kind of respect it in a way. Like, yeah, I agree. He should have died in battle. I do respect him coming back because I can't, like, Napoleon, what Napoleon did, which was live his final years unhappy on a secluded island, you couldn't really imagine him doing, right? And so I think He probably should have come back for the 100 Days and died in a blaze of glory. That would have been a little more Napoleon. But in the end, he just got sent to another island. And it was kind of a sad way for one of the greatest conquerors of Europe to go. Yeah, this is very true. Napoleon's conquests are talked about, super widely, which is fair because they were so, grand. But there is very little attention paid to Napoleon's administration. His administration and legal reforms in France and the influence his administration had throughout Europe. Spreading the Napoleonic legal code, also on an intellectual level, spreading Enlightenment ideas. I know the Napoleon Enlightenment, it's very odd because in some ways he's very counter to that movement, but it doesn't change the fact that those ideas and the Napoleonic legal code and a lot of his reforms were spread throughout Europe while he was conquering, not making a moral judgment, because a lot of his conquests, like the deal with Switzerland and a lot of these countries that, France was lording over everybody else. They were on a power trip, and that's not good. But it was super influential. So yeah, I agree. Napoleon's administrative and legal reforms are super underrated. Napoleon's career follows a strangely similar path to the career of LeBron James. Roman, what do you mean by that? How? Isn't Napoleon a quintessential monarch of the Enlightenment? Yeah, I think in some ways. Everything for the people, but nothing by the people. Yes, but there's obviously, and I know, the Enlightenment is kind of what I study, so I know a bit more about this. Obviously, the question emerges, the whole emergence of the enlightened despot and the enlightened monarch, is that sort of counter to the movement of the Enlightenment. Now, people like Voltaire loved a good enlightened despot. Voltaire is obviously one of the main figures of the Enlightenment, but he wanted the people to have no power, no education, and he wanted the elite to rule over everybody, as a lot of Enlightenment thinkers did. There's kind of this idea these days that the Enlightenment was all about democracy and liberty, and in some ways it was, but in other ways it was not. A figure like Voltaire, I would say, was not really about. He definitely wasn't about democracy, and he was only about liberty in some ways. So you have figures like that, and then you also have, first off, us who are looking back on the Enlightenment and might feel like an enlightened despot is in some ways a betrayal of the movement, and figures at the time like, say, a Thomas Jefferson or a Denis Diderot or a Condorcet. These are Enlightenment figures of the era. So this isn't just us projecting back on the era. These are Enlightenment figures of the era, and someone like Diderot hated enlightened despots. He felt that enlightened despotism was contrary to everything the Enlightenment was about. Thomas Jefferson hated European hereditary feudalism. Now, obviously, there's a lot of contradictions with Jefferson and himself. He was a planter elite, he owned slaves, all that kind of stuff. But he was also someone who felt like that sort of elite hereditary feudalism and enlightened monarchs were contrary to the movement. So I think you're right, and that way Napoleon is one of the sort of perfect enlightened despots, even though he was a little after that sort of era. But I think a lot of people at the time and now, including myself, think that the idea of an enlightened despot is sort of contrary to many aspects of the Enlightenment. Yeah, Gustav is one of those interesting Enlightenment monarchs. I don't know as much about him as I do the other ones. Catherine, Joseph, Frederick the Great is the most obvious one, but Gustav's also a really important one. Okay, let me read your description of this, Roman. Started off as a young prodigy, true. Held an undisputed level of power and dominance. Other great powers. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty loose comparison, Roman. I'm not gonna lie. Because I don't know, Napoleon did start off a young prodigy, but he did have to work his way up a little, you know. Whereas LeBron really leapt onto the scene, and I guess Napoleon, like once Napoleon got into Italy, he definitely leapt onto the scene. But you know, it took him a little bit to get there. He worked his way up with Corsican politics, and you know, so I don't know. Ha, that's funny, Light X Heaven. He thought Bernadotte wouldn't last long in Sweden. Well, he was wrong, huh? I don't know about Bernadotte too much in general, but from what I've seen and you know what you've talked about, I know at the very least he seems to have been a pretty good monarch, a pretty good leader, and his dynasty was also pretty damn successful. So there's some ironic comments from the man Napoleon. Ah, yeah, he hated the cold weather. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem. I've never been to Sweden, but I do know y'all have it cold up there. All right, thank you, Roman. Thanks for being here. Um, you didn't moderate anything except your own misspelled comment, but it was still good to have you. I hope you go and enjoy reading more about medieval China. I know very little about medieval China, so you know, come back with some more knowledge. Goodbye. Well, okay. I mean, if you think that, you know, I can. I mean, look, I can remove your moderation position, but that's fine. Um, wow. Okay, but what is the weather actually like in Sweden? So I was born in Scotland, and that's where I grew up. And how it is there is that it's generally mild and gray. So it's always kind of cold, but in the winter it doesn't get super cold. I imagine in Sweden it gets super cold in the winter, but do you like what's your weather cycle like? Like, does it get hot at points, or are you generally a mild country in terms of weather, not temperament? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I figured that the north would be very very cold. Um, yeah, well, you know, global warming, huh? Not a good thing, but you know, yeah, your country will get a little warmer. I mean, that's how it's been in the UK. I mean, Scotland is still pretty cold generally. But you know, in England nowadays, summer in England, if you're in South England, like London or Brighton or whatever, you know, it's getting warm in the summertime. Like they're getting warm summers now, which is crazy. It's not like it was like a super cold country, but you know, when I was a kid, it was generally pretty mild throughout the whole year, even in southern England. But now it gets pretty hot. Um, yeah, yeah, that's kind of like Alaska, I guess. They also have that crazy weather where the sun is out all the time. Yeah, Trevor, you. I'm gonna mod you, Trevor. By the way. Um, you're now my simp. Yeah, Trevor, you take a trip up to Norway, not when it's sunny all the time, but when it's dark. And just get as depressed as possible. That sounds like a great idea. Okay. Yeah, just listen to The Cure. Yeah, that's great. That's gonna make you feel better. Okay, I wanted to do a reaction to Extra History Catherine the Great on this live stream, but, um, we're dropping a lot of frames. I don't know if it was I don't think it's my internet connection. I think it's my computer, which is really old and stuff. Or maybe it is my internet connection. I have no idea. But I think I'm going to try doing this reaction, and then I need y'all to let me know if it's just like unbearable. If we're skipping. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I would love to do more Q&A streams. I like just getting on here, chatting. I like talking about history. That's the whole reason the channel exists. I mean, it's just an excuse for me to talk about history through the guise of reactions. But yeah, we can definitely do that more on stream. But okay, I think we're going to switch to here we go. The reaction style, and I'm going to attempt to react to this video, or we'll just do a bit of a test run, and then you guys in chat can tell me, if it's unbearably bad. Yeah, speaking of Enlightenment autocrats, hey, and we have the chat up on the screen now. How about that? I should have done that on the full screen, but whatever. All right.
A young girl sits.
Let's check our audio levels. Yeah, Catherine's very relevant to the Enlightenment autocrats.
A young girl sits alone.
Okay. Alright, so we're going to start this reaction to Catherine the Great. Not quite Catherine yet, by Extra History. We're going to see how this goes. And like I said, if this is just incredibly laggy, because it's fine if the Q&A section is laggy, but if the reaction segment ends up being laggy, then it's just not going to work. So just tell me in the comments as soon as possible if this is actually working or if it's like unbearable. And if the latter, that's unfortunate, but it's fine. We can stop and just continue chatting, and I'll try and work something out. So let's get started.
A young girl sits alone in a cold room in a great house on the German coast and dreams of being a queen.
Wow. What an intro. Extra history with those narrativized intros, huh?
That girl's name was Sophia, or Sophie, depending on who's writing about her. She was born in the spring of 1729, but her mother would never forgive her for the crime of being a girl. Her mother, young, ambitious, always wanting to be the center of attention, was deeply discontent in her life, having been married off at 15 to a man 21 years her senior. Worse still, that man was poor, at least by her standards, and stuffy. Her life was nothing like the glittering court that she'd known as a girl. She still had ambition. She still wanted to escape her husband's drab military post, to live in high society and see the world. And to her mind, that required a male heir. And so poor Sophia was neglected.
Well, little would she know. I mean, obviously it's generally unfair expectation to put on your child, but you can kind of understand where she was coming from, I mean. It is very true that a male heir would get you a lot further than a female one at this point. But little did she know that her daughter Sophia would grow into one of the greatest leaders of Russian history, the Empress, the Tsar. All right, yeah, we'll keep doing the reaction then, and we'll see if this works. It is, I mean, it is very laggy, but we'll try it. We'll try it for a bit. Maybe we'll just do the first one, just the first episode, and we'll leave it at that. So we'll continue this.
Often told that she was ugly, yelled at for minor offenses, or simply left entirely alone. She was bright and could memorize things with ease, but she frequently infuriated her tutors by asking questions like, why were the great men of antiquity damned just because they lived before Christ? Or, what was the universe like before creation? She found solace only...
These are interesting questions. But I don't know, they're very much modern r/atheism questions. And, Catherine would be very orthodox down the line. She would adopt it as part of sort of fitting into Russian culture. And yeah, these are very good questions to ask. I agree. But I don't think Catherine's so interesting. Clearly, the spirit of inquisitiveness did stick with her. But, not that radically. She would not be like a materialist or an atheist or anything. That would be way too far. She was a strong Orthodox Christian, though she did embrace elements of the Enlightenment down the line.
Only in the lessons she was taught by one of her governesses, who introduced her to French and brought her books by Racine and Molière. And all the while, her mother doted on her sickly and infirm brother, who had been born a year and a half after she'd entered the world, unwanted. Sophia would always harbor a resentment over the treatment she received compared to her brother, but in 1742, when she was 13, her brother died, succumbing to scarlet fever. Yikes. She had one other brother who would survive their youth, but he was a half-decade younger, and so now, at last, her ambitious mother's eye finally turned to her. But she didn't receive the warmth and the affection that she'd hoped for. Her mother's aim was to see her married. After all, her mother thought, taking her daughter out in search of a match to travel and get back to court might provide a path to escape her drab life. Unfortunately, her daughter was proud, impertinent, and arrogant, or at least so she felt.
Well, her daughter wanted to stand up for herself, so, I think that's fair. Which Enlightenment leader do you think would be a mod on r/atheism? None of the Enlightenment monarchs. None of them were that radical. That was definitely not in the books for any of the Enlightenment monarchs. But in terms of the Enlightenment thinkers, probably David Hume. Now, I know that I don't think he was actually an atheist, but he was very much about empiricism. And he seems to be, Trevor, like he would be the one like, well, I have no empirical evidence for it, but, in terms of actual atheism, Diderot was far more radical. Diderot was a materialist and, probably actually an atheist, which was incredibly radical for the era. But I'd say Diderot was not insufferable enough to be a mod on r/atheism.
If there was to be any attempt at matchmaking, she was going to have to break Sophia of these habits. And so, Sophia learned to hide her pride, to hide her talents, and her mother began writing and visiting all of their relatives in search of a match. And she made sure that Sophia knew just what failing to find a match would mean. From time to time, she would take Sophia to see spinster relatives locked away in a convent, or shut away in a remote wing of a family house.
That's just so weird. Like, you take your daughter to see old spinster aunts. Like, hey, look at this. This could be you. It's also, it's incredibly, to look at it from a more serious perspective, it's pretty sad that, you have these old spinster relatives, many of whom probably just didn't conform to the ideals of the era. Some of whom were probably, lesbians. Not interested, or just not interested in marrying for status, or whatever it is. and they're locked away in old wings of the family home or in convents, or it's not a nice sight. Sophia of Hanover, yeah. Hanover. Very interesting. I mean, Britain or England or Britain, they had an interesting sort of line of succession. And I mean, there's been more focused attention on that, I suppose, since the Queen's death. There's been sort of an increased look at those types of things. I've never been too interested in like royalty or succession in their own right. I'm only really interested in monarchs or that kind of stuff as it relates to my other interests or other arenas of history. There are some people who absolutely just love the royals, usually particularly the British royals, but the royals around the world and lines of succession and family trees. I'm not like super into that kind of stuff, but it is generally interesting.
One of these encounters Sophia would remember forever. An aunt who lived in one small room with 16 pug dogs. 16 pugs who did everything that dogs do in that one room.
Okay, well, I was trying to be a little empathetic to these old spinster aunts, but yeah, the 16 pugs doing all their business in one room, that's a little weird. I'm going to be honest. That's a little strange.
The smell would haunt her for all her days. So she rapidly became enamored of the idea of marriage. She saw it as a way out, an escape from her mother. But her prospects were limited. Her father was not a man of great means, and though he was a prince of one of the tiny principalities that then made up the Holy Roman Empire, he wasn't even the prince of that domain, having others in the line of succession before him.
That's true. That's very true, Light X7. But, these royal genealogies and lines of success, it's so complicated, man. Like, there's, the Byzantines in particular, God, the Byzantine line of succession and the royal families was such a disastrous mess. But yeah, so, some of these, whenever I get an empire or a country or a state or a kingdom, whatever, that just has, line of succession, it's like, just like this, straight up and down. Oh my God, that's a beautiful thing to see, because, and I mean, this speaks to the inherent instability of this sort of system. It is almost never that simple. It is always more complicated.
Her mother, on the other hand, was of the House Holstein-Gottorp, one of the great houses of the Holy Roman Empire. And though she was from a minor branch, she could still reach out to all her cousins. And so it was that, even before her brother died, on a visit to her uncle, Sophia met the orphaned Duke of Holstein, Peter Ulrich, 11 years old at the time.
Oh, Peter.
This young man was the heir to the throne of Sweden, and the last surviving grandson of Peter the Great.
I've got a lot to say about Peter, but I think we'll get more to Peter sort of down the line.
He was also sickly, though, doughy of features, and even at the age of 11, given to drink.
Okay, I mean, doughy of features at the age of 11, give the man a chance. Though, we're gonna give him a chance, and, we'll see how he turns out, I'll put it that way.
This meeting would prove fortuitous in years to come, or disastrous depending on how you look at it. But long before that chance encounter was to change her life, as she was making the rounds looking for a suitor, attention of this type fell on her much closer to home. At the age of 14, a 24-year-old cuirassier...
Oh, it's a good sign that you're drunk at 11. Yeah, maybe that was an early warning sign, huh? Yeah, maybe we should have, thought about a different option than Peter. But, I hate to say this, Peter is an entire whole human being, but let's be honest, in the grand scheme, he's sort of a stepping stone for Catherine. That's, sorry, Peter, if you're listening, that's very rude of me to say. But at least in the history books, that is kind of how you're going to end up.
Her cousin began to, what was called at the time, show his affections, often finding her in some secluded corner of the house when no one else was around to kiss her. He eventually proposed to her, although she expertly put him off by agreeing to it only if he could get the consent of her parents. Then, in the middle of dinner one night, a letter came. It was from Russia, from the Russian
Ooh.
Empress, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, whose sister had married a Holstein. Elizabeth, who was the aunt of Peter Ulrich. Elizabeth, who had been betrothed at one point to Sophia's uncle.
Okay.
Elizabeth, whose association Sophia's mother had been very careful to cultivate.
Yeah, we're in the what is it? The era of the four empresses. Sort of the way I look at it is the post Peter the Great, pre Catherine the Great. This is kind of how I look at this era of Russian history. Just sort of unfortunate because it's definitely understudied. I don't know that much about it. Same with a lot of people. But you have Peter, then you have a bunch of sort of mediocre rulers. Some are bad, some are better than others. And then we have Catherine. And so it is very easy to sort of bookend this period with Peter and Catherine and then sort of skip over this era because we have two of the most important Russian czars of all time. Yeah. Networking has always been a thing. I mean, just at this point, you're networking between all these different royal families and, cousin of a cousin and your aunt and etc. etc. So, but hey, is that much different than, say, I don't know, like the business world of today? There's still a lot of nepotism going around. It's not as obvious, and obviously, this is more than just nepotism. I mean, it's all about family ties, but we still have a lot of, this is Brad. I don't know. Whatever. I was going to make some joke about frat guys getting employed at, like, their dad's business or something. But yeah, networking's always been a thing.
Regularly sending her news and portraits of her daughter. Elizabeth had recently become the guardian of young Peter Ulrich, adopting him as her own. And as such, young Peter had lost the right to the crown of Sweden, but had gained a much greater prize, succession to the crown of Russia.
Yeah, look, I hate to say it, Latinx Heaven, but at this point, I got to agree. I think the crown of Russia is definitely a better prize than the crown of Sweden. Now, if we rewind a bit, I might have a different opinion, but at this point in time, Russia is kind of where it's at. No offense taken. Yeah, but I mean, of course, that's a very powerful position to be in, heir to the Russian throne. Is Peter ready for the job? I mean, his namesake is his granddaddy, Peter the Great, and he was an incredibly impressive czar. I think we're going to see how ready for the job Peter is, and that's not too much.
Elizabeth's letter said nothing of its purpose, but simply implored Sophia and her mother to travel at once to Russia. Despite the letter's vagueness, the implications were clear. Sophia might yet find her way to being a queen.
The alcohol says yes. Yeah, good point, Trevor. The drinking at 11. Yeah, I think that says he was definitely qualified for the job, huh? Yeah, that's how I would interpret that. Peter the Great was the only great Peter. Go figure, yeah. Well, yeah, that's worth noting at this point.
As she had so often daydreamed. But the night's surprises weren't over yet. Mere hours after the first letter's arrival, a second courier, breathless and panting, burst into the house.
Oh my.
He too had a letter, but this one was from Frederick the Great, summoning them to his court in Berlin.
Hey, talking about enlightened despots, enlightened monarchs, here is the greatest of them all. Greatest as in most famous. Frederick the Great is really, I would say, I think a lot of people would agree, sort of the archetypical enlightened monarch. It was in his footsteps that those who came after followed, basically. And of course Frederick is involved in this story. He's just an incredibly important guy. Good old Frederick. Yeah, I gotta be honest. I mean, I know all of these monarchs are brutal expansionist monarchs who did do a lot of bad, but I kind of am a fan of Frederick. I do like Frederick. There's something about him. I mean, he's this archetypical Enlightenment monarch. His conquests are definitely impressive. There's a lot of stuff there. Yeah, the other Peter the Great, Family Guy Peter. Very true, Trevor. The second Peter the Great, Peter from Family Guy. But yeah, I'm a big Frederick fan, and whereas my opinions on Catherine are definitely, I'd say, more mixed. I mean, my opinions on Frederick are mixed as well. He's a complex character. I like Catherine a little bit less, but I don't want to like jump the gun. I feel like we've got a lot to talk about later in the series, so I feel like we'll talk to it when we get to it.
Sophia's mother wasted no time starting to pack. The invitation to Russia had come with a banknote for 10,000 rubles to equip them for their journey.
Hello.
This, of course, went not to making sure that Sophia looked like a bride that they had both hoped she would be, but instead went towards outfitting her mother with a splendid array of court dresses. And so they began their journey.
What I will say, and I mean, this is definitely a spoiler alert, but, Catherine's mother treated her terribly. Did Catherine learn some lessons from that? Because she didn't treat her own son too well either. Yeah, that's true. That is very true. It's obvious that Frederick wanted to expand and make Prussia more powerful, bring it onto the world stage. But I think you're also right. I do think they were absolutely defensive. I mean, look, it's all power politics. That's why it's kind of hard to bring, like, morality into it, because, like, Frederick wants to secure Prussia's position on the world stage, and you are correct that his neighbors, Austria particularly, wanted to prevent that. So they're both sort of going at the same thing. So it's not to call out Frederick or Prussia in particular. It's more just to acknowledge that that's what, like, all of these monarchs were doing. Yeah, that is another Roman thing. The Romans, as you know, absolutely loved this. Every war was defensive. This seems to be like when you're the biggest empire and you believe you're the greatest and, your way of doing things is the best. You have to believe that you're always morally right. I mean, we can see this, not to get too political, but we can, in my opinion, see this with the modern American empire. Every war or every conflict you engage in has to be justified. It has to be, you're doing something good or you're being defensive or whatever. But yeah, the Romans in particular really like to describe all of their wars as defensive. And honestly, pretend a lot of the time that they had been attacked or insulted to the level that they must respond.
First to Berlin, and then to Moscow. When they arrived at Berlin, Sophia's mother raced to present herself to Frederick, but to her shock, he simply asked where her daughter was.
Oh.
She hadn't taken Sophia with her to court, thinking that the king couldn't possibly want to talk to the girl more than to her incredible self. So she said that Sophia was sick. The next day, too, she showed up at court alone, and again Frederick asked where Sophia was, and again her mother said that she was sick. On the third day...
That's a burn. Clearly Frederick does actually want to see Sophia. And her mother, who so far has just been trying to make herself the center of all the attention, is not really getting that, but hopefully is going to eventually get it. I mean, I can't see her really improving her behavior at this point, but, come on.
Frederick pressed the issue, and Sophia's mother said that she couldn't come because she had nothing to wear. At which juncture, a somewhat miffed Frederick the Great cut her off and asked one of his sisters to just lend the poor girl a dress, please.
Yeah, fair enough. Frederick was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He was. But, his father, now that's a real no-nonsense kind of guy. You know what I mean? Frederick certainly was a no-nonsense fellow. His father, even more so. Frederick the Great would indulge in the arts, writing, literature, philosophy. He was, in some ways, he wanted to enjoy aspects of life and find sort of a deeper meaning and explore. And that's one of the things that makes him so great, why he's such a famous leader. Yeah, a lot of Fredericks. Yeah, Frederick the Great was willing to explore those aspects of life. But his father, wasn't really interested. He was a very pious, straightforward type of guy, and he was not very pleased with his son. even though his son would go on to being, Frederick the Great, probably one of the best remembered monarchs of this period.
Finally, Sophia appeared before the king, in an ill-fitting dress without jewels or finery. She was shy, worried about what this great man might think. But to her surprise, and undoubtedly the surprise of her mother, she was seated at dinner that night right next to the king. Her mother wasn't even seated at the same table. The king
Yikes.
tried to make her feel comfortable, speaking to her of poetry and of the opera, plays and ballet. And though everybody stared at the king talking to a child, he continued on and she opened up, speaking to him throughout the meal. By the end, he saw in her, hidden just below that layer of humility, an intelligence and a perception. He wrote to Elizabeth of Russia to say as much.
See, and isn't this an interesting thing? We talked about networking earlier, and if we look at this time period, the networks of aristocrats and royals throughout Europe was really incredible, and much larger than I think we might realize, particularly because, Germany, which was not a country at this time, sort of the region, had, probably hundreds and maybe thousands of princes and, all these different types of people who were part of this aristocratic network. And we can see, for example, Frederick, in consultation with the Empress of Russia, trying to decide who would be a good bride for the next heir. They're monarchs of two different sovereign entities, but they're still talking about it. Using one monarch to vet another potential monarch. Yeah, it's very curious, but I guess that shows, I think, one, respect for Frederick's influence, and two, probably a respect for either his mind or his perspective, or his intelligence. Thank you, Georgios. I appreciate that.
He had been assessing her, because in his bid to make Prussia a player on the world stage, he had already created many enemies, and he knew that he would have to have Russia on his side. It was his hope that this German princess could help ensure that, but...
Well, let's see. Yeah, I enjoyed the Greek War of Independence series. I think it's interesting. It's also, Greek history is super important in general, from the ancient times to the modern era. And the videos on the Greek War of Independence, I think it's fascinating because it is consequential and important for the era. We have the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, the French Rev, and then, like the Holy Alliance, the Concert of Europe. And so these European great powers are not interested in another liberal revolution. But Greece has been all whipped up by these Enlightenment ideas, and they saw what the French did, and, they want to have their own nationalist revolution. And so this is a big moment in sort of the European geopolitical order, as the European powers at first ignore the Greek War for Independence for several years, and then eventually have to get involved, because Russia is just itching to get involved and take more Ottoman territory. So it's an interesting one. Yes, as Frederick's diplomacy would tell you, he had no enemies. Yeah, everyone's friends, just sometimes we don't entirely get along. Sometimes I have to go to war with you to defend my territory and take some of yours. Exactly, that's what we do with friends.
But his business was not just with Sophia. In private, his agents asked her mother to be their agent in the Russian court. They explained how...
So we have on the surface collaboration between the Russian and Prussian monarchs, but of course there's also some subterfuge behind the scenes.
How one Count Bestuchev was the sworn enemy of Prussia, and that he would stop Sophia's marriage if he could. And so Sophia's mother, Johanna, should do everything in her power to make him lose favor. Never again would these two rulers meet in person. These rulers whom history titles the Great. But it's far from the last time that their paths will cross. Join us next time as Sophia finally makes her way to Russia, and her mother sets about trying to destroy Count Bestuchev.
Wow. Last time they would meet, huh? I'd say both deserve the title of the Great. Do I rate Frederick or Bismarck higher? We'll go back to the full screen here. Good question. That's an interesting comparison, because, we're talking about, about 100 years of separation. Sort of one of the most prominent monarchs of the mid 1700s versus one of the most prominent politicians and state builders of the mid to late 1800s? Man, I really don't know. I mean, both are incredibly important for modern Germany. Um, Frederick the Great's father, William the First or whatever, was incredibly important in establishing Prussia as an important regional power. Frederick the Great was really important in terms of sort of joining Prussia up to the Great Powers Club. Now, by the time Frederick the Great was gone, Prussia still had a while to go before it was seen as an equal to the rest of them. And to be fair, it would always be eclipsed by powers like France and Russia. But Frederick the Great really cemented Prussia's place in Europe versus Bismarck. The creation of the German Empire took a lot of people, a lot of individuals. But if there was one person who was most responsible, it's gotta be Bismarck. I mean, really, it's honestly remarkable how individually responsible he could be seen as for the development of Germany. His wars, his diplomacy, incredibly intelligent. He clearly saw like miles ahead of where he was at the time. And then also his role in early German politics. Just a really important guy. Though like with all these people, these are all complicated figures, and if you view them in moral terms, there's always bad things that are going to pop up. Bismarck was not super great to the Poles in the German Empire. He did not treat them very well. So I really don't know. I mean, without Frederick the Great, do you even get the chance for someone like Bismarck to do what he does? I'm not so sure. So maybe I'd have to go with Frederick, but I'm also more interested in that time period. So, yeah, I don't know. Napoleon versus Bismarck. In terms of who I like more, I'd go with Napoleon, definitely. In terms of, historical importance, Napoleon really can't be overstated. Yeah, I've heard this phrase before, Light X Heaven. Bismarck's greatest failure was that he could not imagine a world without Bismarck. I think this is true. And we see this with a lot of great leaders throughout history. We were just talking about, Augustus. That's not really a fair comparison. Augustus failed to make a world without he failed to find a good successor. So that's not really true. I retract that. But I think a lot of leaders are kind of like that, because they're very egotistical, because they're very important, powerful people. And I don't know if it was ego with Bismarck or if, he literally was just so instrumental to the functioning of Germany that, literally, it couldn't work the same without him. And that was true. Yeah. Bismarck is an icon of sort of realpolitik. That's what he was best at. And in many ways, Frederick was the same. He is also sort of an icon of realpolitik. So very, very interesting figures, I would say. Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, Light X Heaven loves Napoleonic videos on YouTube. And yeah, I could see that. Bismarck was definitely someone whose personal qualities helped things together. A lot of what he did was about that personal diplomacy that he brought to everything, that personal touch. Yeah, Davout is a perfectly fair selection. Davout is a good selection, definitely. Yeah, the Napoleon's Marshals is so interesting. It's such a collection of talent. And I mean, I think we see that whenever we have like wars or revolutions or these sort of events, we really bring together a really interesting group of people. We saw that with the American Revolution, the French Revolution, Napoleon's marshals. I think Davout's a great choice. I like Ney. I think it's kind of a normie choice, but Ney is so daring, so brave, like such an interesting figure. I mean Suchet, he's pretty great. I mean, he was so just a well-rounded, practical guy, Of course, we got to shout out Bernadotte for Light X Heaven here. Our Swedes in chat. Yeah, Ney was an interesting guy. I mean, like, to be fair, I mentioned this earlier, but, Napoleon's return from Elba, his 100 days, it was basically doomed from the start. So, like, a lot of Napoleon's marshals did not join up with him again. And for a lot of them, I mean, some of them seem to have been really quite anti-Napoleon by that point. A lot of them just weren't interested in joining up again, and I can't really blame them because, I mean, you really couldn't see it going any other way. I mean, Napoleon could have fought on for longer, certainly, but I think at the end, he was kind of doomed once he returned. With the amount of resources and troops that the coalition had marshaled, it was really going to be incredibly difficult to resist, for Napoleon to resist, I think. All right. We've been going for a little more than 2 hours. Yeah, I mean, I think Napoleon could have potentially beaten Wellington. But, like I said, I think even if he'd done that, he would have lost in the end. The coalition had too many men, too many resources. But anyway, we've been going for a little more than 2 hours. We reacted to part 1 of Catherine the Great by Extra History. I need to go back and look at how that went, how many frames we dropped, if it's usable. Yeah, so I think I'm going to bring this live stream to an end. But if you have any last questions or anything you want to add, please, leave it in the comments right now, and I will respond. Before we shut this down, I'm willing to stay for a couple more minutes, responding to questions and, any historical topics you want to bring up. But otherwise, thank you everybody for being here. I enjoy just talking about history, so you can definitely expect more of these live streams in the future. Hopefully I can improve the connections, or the connection, sorry. I don't know if that's going to happen, or it might just be my old-ass computer. If that's the case, then I don't know what to do about that. When will you escape from Elba? Yeah, that's where I'm at in my little enclosed box on the screen. As you guys can see, I'm stuck in Elba. The British will never see it coming. That's all I have to say. Do I play any historic games? I don't, actually. I know that strategy games are like massive amongst the history community, but I don't. I'm just not into. I mean, I haven't tried many. I haven't tried any of the big ones, but I've just never really been into strategy games that much. Yeah, I don't know. Um, so no, I'm not really into historical games. But maybe at some point in the future, I do find them. I mean, obviously, I love the topics. I'm very much into the history. That's what intrigues me the most about them. Yes, very good discussions. Um, yeah, it's just fun to get to talk about history a little bit. Like I said, I made the channel with the purpose of talking about history. Um, and a reaction channel is a good way to do that because it lets you address a diverse uh, series of topics. But this was good because someone brings something up in chat, I can just immediately address it, and we can talk about things we wouldn't otherwise get to. Um, like the divine right of kings, which if we wanted to, we could extend this live stream for an extra 3 hours talking about the divine right of kings. But I think that would be me and maybe Light X7 here. And yeah, Georgios, that is very accurate to the Byzantine Empire. Uh, yeah, on the verge of bankruptcy from the many wars you have to fight. Either because, like Justinian, you've tried to reconquer the old empire, and, in the end, that all ended up crumbling away, or you're just a later Byzantine emperor who can hardly manage to maintain the empire's borders at all. Because it's difficult to run a big empire for that long a period of time, especially if we're moving into like medieval era. So that's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, I'm gonna be signing off now. Before you guys go, I would appreciate it if you would check out the newest reaction. It was on the Russian Revolution. It was an interesting one. It's an interesting topic. It completely flopped views wise. But I'll send you guys there before we leave. Yeah, and aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time.